I've come here today to worship again, 'cause I know that my Father's here. My Father has shown me a way, away from the pain of the sin that I've stumbled in. You lift up my eyes, you show me the scars where your love paid everything, paid for me to live with my God. No longer apart, for you bled and you died for me. My soul is alive with worship. I'm singing again, 'cause my heart, it overflows with the love and mercy of you, my God. My soul is alive with wonder. I'm welcomed again before you, my Father. How I love to worship you, my God, yeah. I'm covered and clean, forgiven and free by the grace that you stand me in. I'm standing, my feet on a rock, my future in God and my soul you've counted free. Oh, 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 oh. My soul is alive with worship. I'm singing again, 'cause my heart, it overflows with the love and mercy of you, my God. My soul is alive with wonder. I'm welcomed again before you, my Father. Oh, how I love to worship you, my God, yeah. My soul is alive with worship. I'm singing again, 'cause my heart, it overflows with the love and mercy of you, my God. My soul is alive with worship. I'm singing again, 'cause my heart, it overflows with the love and mercy of you, my God. My soul is alive with wonder. I'm welcomed again before you, my Father. Oh, how I love to worship you, my God, yeah. How sweet the name of Jesus sounds in a believer's ear. It soothes our sorrows, heals our wounds, and drives away our fear. It makes the wounded spirit whole and heals our brokenness. It's manna to the hungry soul and to the weary rest. Just one name I adore. Just one name awakes my soul. Just one name above them all. Jesus. Oh, we worship you, Jesus. Just one name I adore. Just one name awakes my soul. Just one name above them all. Jesus. Jesus, my shepherd, savior, friend, oh prophet, priest, and king, my Lord, my life, my way, my end, accept the praise I bring. Dear name, the rock I'll build upon, my shield and hiding place, my never failing treasury, with boundless stores of grace. Just one name I adore. Just one name awakes my soul. Just one name above them all. Jesus. Just one name I adore. Just one name awakes my soul. Just one name above them all. Jesus. So weak the effort of my heart, and cold my warmest sword. But when I see you as you are, I'll sing forevermore. Till then, your love I will proclaim with every fleeting breath. And may the music of your name refresh my soul in death. Just one name I adore. Just one name awakes my soul. Just one name above them all. Jesus, be high lifted. Just one name I adore. Just one name awakes my soul. Just one name above them all. Jesus. Before the very start of time, you were thinking of me. Before I even opened my eyes, you were looking at me, and your eyes were full of pure delight as you set your heart on mine. There's always been a plan for me in you. I lift my eyes up to you, and I just smile at the view. For when I look in your eyes, looking back in love, keep my eyes fixed on you. You see me in my daily life, every pleasure and hurts. You see the things I long to hide, but you're helping me learn that my eyes have drifted left and right, but I can't escape your sight. You've never given up the fight for me. So I lift my eyes up to you, and I just smile at the view. For when I look in your eyes, you're looking back in love. Keep my eyes fixed on you. Forever you have been my God. Now I'm looking ahead. You promise you will be my guide till the end of the age. That your grace will make me all my life. 'Cause your spirit lives inside. I know I have eternal life in you. So I lift my eyes up to you, and I just smile at the view. When I look in your eyes, you're looking back in love. Keep my eyes fixed on you. You are holding on to me, and forever you will be holding on to me. You are holding on to me, and forever you will be holding on to me. You are holding on to me, and forever you will be holding on to me. You are holding on to me, and forever you will be holding on to me. You are holding on to me, forever
Hands up.
Heaven thundered and the world was born. Life begins and ends in the dust you form. Faith commanded and the mountain moved. Fear is losing ground to a hope in you. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. You're unstoppable. Freedom conquered, all our chains undone. Stand defeated, stand defeated. Jesus is overthrown. Mercy triumphed when the third day dawned. Darkness was denied when the storm was gone. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Everybody say, oh, 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 nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forever.
Well, hello there. Welcome to Tough Questions with Youth Culture. It is so good to be with you. Every lunchtime through the course of this week, we're going to be coming live to you and tackling some of the biggest subjects that are hitting youth culture in the UK right now. We're going to be looking at sex. We're going to be looking at the secular gospels and the gospel place that it has in today's culture. We're going to be looking at life online. Today, we're going to be looking at the subject of race and racism. We're going to be posing the question, how can we transition from a moment to lasting change when it comes to racial reconciliation? And it is my great privilege to have two members of the Hylton family with me right now. Many of you would have already engaged with Owen a little bit, but we've also got Daisy with us. Good to have you with us, Daisy.
Thank you.
Good to have you both here. And I'd love just to start by asking you both how this season has been. I hear the whole family have been together since lockdown started. What's it been like? What's been going on for you guys as a family?
Yeah, it's been really fun. We're like a games family and I win every game that I play, so that's also been good. But yeah, we haven't gotten tired of each other, not sick of each other yet, so that was
That's
good.
a big statement to be saying that you haven't got tired of each other. And top game in terms of, is it board games or what's the...
I think it's all of them.
Yeah?
It is all of them, but Monopoly is,
Is the number one?
the number one, I think, yeah.
Nice. Owen, what's it been like for you?
Yeah, it's been good. I think we've been very fortunate that we've all been working.
Yeah.
And so that has been a real, I think, blessing because so many people haven't had that. I think probably one of the other things that happened was Pauline's father died of COVID during that period of time. And so that was a bit of a challenge and doing the kind of 12 people funeral was a challenge, but we've even seen God's grace and hand in that as well. So yeah, it's been a good family time, although we understand and recognise some of the challenges that have been out there for lots of people.
And that's it. And it has been so different for so many people across this nation with all kinds of different challenges. And just to touch on the Monopoly thing, it's definitely been a feature of our lockdown as well. The sad thing for me, I've got a 9 and a 7-year-old, and it's reached the day where they both beat me at Monopoly now. So I'm starting to steal from the bank and stuff like that, a few 500 notes and stuff. But we want to get into the into this subject. There's this lockdowns obviously happened, coronavirus has hit, and I don't think any of us really realised the severity when we first started hearing the news come from China, and then in March as we start to move into this phase. And it presented its own challenges. But then there's this day that takes place, the 25th of May, and it's a day that none of us will forget now. It's in our history. It's changed the way that we think, the way that we speak when it comes to the subject of racism here in the UK. And it was the day that George Floyd was murdered over in America by local policemen who was arrested brutally, died later in custody. And that day has genuinely changed the conversation around race here in the UK, and that's where we want to focus. But I just want us to start there. I want us to just, that day where social media starts popping and going crazy, maybe we could start with you, Daisy. What's going on for you when you start seeing social media come at you with that brutal murder?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot on social media, and I think initially I was just filled with sadness. Like, it's so sad to see people, whether it's in America or not, being killed purely for the fact that they are black. I know we've seen it happen before, but I feel like that video was just something different, and I personally couldn't watch it, but I was glad it was recorded because that seems to be the only way to get people to actually listen and see things now if you have, visual proof. So in one way that was good, but I think, overall just with the whole global pandemic, the fact that black people especially are still disproportionately dying from it, and then with the police and people you think are on your side in this time, again, are just murdering them just purely because they're black. Yeah, it's just outrageous. And it's like, I feel like enough is enough. And if you didn't know before now, you need to know. You need to tune in, you need to engage.
So let's explore that a little bit. But I suppose, Owen, what was it like for you? So being the social media guru that you are, it probably didn't reach you through social media, but I know... I think through the context of family.
I mean, it didn't reach through my own social media because I don't have any. But it was Daisy who first showed it to me. And I think initially I my thoughts were, we've seen this before, what's different? And probably there's also some sadness and connectedness to it because George Floyd wasn't much younger than me. And
Right.
so, in some ways that could have been me. I think what he was doing was not so outrageous that... And so for me, it was challenging, and then that whole week was a bit of a challenging week for us at home. We were having conversations around it. There was a lot of emotion around it. There was some tension around it, it wasn't an easy week in our household after George Floyd died. No.
So can we just go there a little bit? I know it may seem odd for people just tuning in, but actually I think it's really helpful in terms of what's going on in terms of the family dynamic. So for you, Daisy, that week particularly, what are some of the emotions that are going on? How are you seeing your dad respond? What's that doing for you? How are you engaging with friends, people in and outside of the family? What's that week like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, we talk about race all the time, but we didn't, with the whole George Floyd thing, it wasn't spoken about a lot, as with our dad. Like, I spoke about it with my sisters all the time, with my friends and stuff like that. And I mean, social media was really crazy. I think we all took a break. We needed like a day off, but the initial response from dad came a bit later. I think, I don't know, just due to reflection and things like that.
So what's going on, Owen? Because usually you wouldn't be one to shy away from a hot topic. So what's going on for you?
Yeah, no, I suppose I didn't know what to do, and I also there was some personal reflection within it, and having been shown it by Daisy, then one of my other daughters was I suppose kind of pushing me, Dad. They began to say, "What are you going to do, Dad? You can't just sit around and not do anything." So and we had a very tense. I was I probably wasn't very nice on one particular day. And then on the Sunday after George Floyd had died, Daisy showed me a post from Governor B. Ben Lindsay sent me a post from Toppy Colioso, and then Ben Lindsay and I had a conversation that evening, and I realised, oh, this thing is massive. This thing is growing. It's not, oh, it happened last week and it's over. This is mushrooming. This is growing.
Can you help us can we just go down a little bit deeper? Some people watching are going to be like, went on the same journey. For some people, they're even now maybe thinking, I don't understand what the big deal was about that particular moment. And can you just take us to a deeper level in understanding what was really going on there and what was it that you realised was going on?
I mean, I think for many black people, their experiences have been of sometimes overt but much covert racism just throughout their lives. And I think because people, they're so used to people dismissing it or ignoring it, then it just gets buried. And so for a lot of black people, some of their experiences have just been buried. I think what George Floyd did, it was almost like an underground explosion. It was almost like a nuclear explosion underground. And it pushed up a whole load of, I suppose, buried hurt and pain and experience that some people who had never said a word about anything were suddenly talking about it. And what happened is that happened just worldwide, but that also happened in lots of churches. So suddenly in churches, you've got people who are crying and getting annoyed at their pastors. They're looking around going, what are you doing about this? What are you saying about this? And those were people that maybe had never made a comment before. And it wasn't that just that George Floyd had happened, it had ignited stuff in them. And that's what I mean by there was this kind of almost underground explosion that really pushed things to the surface that were already there, just brought it out.
And Daisy, I mean, I wouldn't usually do this with young women, but do you mind me asking how old you are?
21.
21. And I know that you've come through New Day, so there's going to be people tuning in to this that are church leaders, youth leaders, people that are engaged with New Day, probably some young people as well. And just, I know it's not always easy to revisit situations, but in terms of what your dad's saying there, in terms of this underground explosion, just some of your personal experience that would help people understand what is it that you're really getting at. For there might be people that are tuned in right now, racism in the UK, 2020, really? And maybe we're sort of sat here going, how can you not see it, as you've just said? Just help us understand a little bit about some of the experiences that would just educate people around racism.
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, what you said about the reflection was really real, because I had conversations with people, like a lot of my black friends, who were just speaking about things that you don't even notice. It's so normal. It's like a normal thing, and then you start to accept it, and it's just seen everywhere. And I think one of the most common things is that if you are suspicious looking, in other words, just a person of color walking into a shop, the likelihood of you being, followed, stopped, and there's times where people have like accused me of putting something in my bag that never happened, is very, very high, and it's a very normal thing. And it's so interesting that, I actually work in a shop now, and I see it from like the other side, and they'll always say to me, "Oh, look at that person," like in the headphone. I'm thinking, if I didn't know any better, I would take this opinion that, say, my boss or manager's saying, and I would take that with me elsewhere, and then I would have that view of all people that look like that, especially if I didn't know any person. And that usually is what happens. But I mean, we see it in the media. We see it for me personally, with hair and makeup. I see it all the time about the norm, which is white, say straight hair, and then everything else is abnormal, and everything else is to the side and is just not really for me or something like that. So yeah.
It's so helpful. And I remember, Owen, you and I talking a little bit in terms of the experience of young black men and women growing up in comparison. And for me, this was pre-George Floyd, you and I having a conversation where I'm saying, I don't get it, because I used to get stopped by the police all the time. I remember one particular time, 5 times I got stopped, and the policeman basically says to me, you can file complaint, but it's going to be all the paperwork in the world and it'll be a nightmare. And I suppose one of the things where the penny dropped for me is that I should have been stopped. There was a reason why the police were stopping me, because I was known to them and I was up to no good. And I think you've helped me understand, actually, there are young black men and women that are getting stopped all the time, that are very young, probably much younger than I was, actually, when I was getting stopped, and for no reason other than the colour of their skin. What about your own experience, Owen? I mean, you're a little bit older than myself and Daisy, and I won't ask your age, but just tell us, for you, I mean, there's a moment that we want to talk to in a minute. What's it been like for you here in the UK as a church leader, as a young black man growing up?
I mean, I think you do get used to this idea. So as a teenager, I was stopped by the police, and again, I'd never done anything wrong. I'd never but I had been stopped. I think not that long ago, a couple of years ago, when one of my daughters moved to another town and we visited that town, somebody shouts out a racist comment to me just walking through the town centre. I know that I adjust myself because of this. So there are certain shops that I'll go into. Normally you go into shops, Tesco's or whatever, and it's all fine. But there are some shops I go into in some areas where I'll always pick up a receipt when I go in, because I don't want what happened to Daisy, I don't want to happen to me. So I'll pick up a receipt. I might have only spent £3.50, but I'll pick up the receipt just so that I don't have an embarrassing moment 20 yards at the door when somebody might, want to question me. And so, and that kind of thing I do just commonly. That's normal, and I've just come to accept that is the way it works. As I suppose as a black man living in the UK. So.
And that is tragic. I mean, even just hearing it again, we've become close friends, and I just find that deeply moving, and it's not okay, and we obviously want to see change, and we're going to talk about that in a little while as well. This season has basically brought out all kinds of different responses. I mean, we have literally seen a political response. We've seen people respond quite harshly. We've seen people literally demonstrate against demonstrating for Black Lives Matter. We've seen the secular respond, but we've also seen the church respond, and it's been mixed. And just talk to me a little bit, for both of you, I'm sure there's been many. What are the biggest challenges that this season has really brought to your front door? What are some of the things that you're finding most challenging in terms of how the UK has responded?
Yeah, I think for me it's like there's been so many other movements of minority groups that have gotten somewhere, and people have respected it. And of course, it's just the Black Lives Matter is the one movement that people are literally fighting against. Like, they're completely not for it, completely just, I guess, as you said, they're just proving what the problem is, and they still don't realize. And I think another one for me is, I think this is more in the church context, because there have been some really good conversations. There's been, you know, space for that. But it's when someone will tell you a story and then say, this is because I'm Black. And then the questions will always come back like, are you sure? Like, are you sure it's not because of your class? Like, it can be because of your class, your gender, anything else, but people don't want to believe that things like this happen purely just because of your race.
Sure.
And I think that's really challenging, because it's like, you can't dismiss someone's experience. If they tell you it's because they're Black, then it is. You know, you have to believe them, because, I think that, to me, it has been challenging to try and, you know, see and think, where's the hope? But, yeah.
And that's a tiring thing. I mean, one of the things that I kept hearing to be honest, for a long time, not just in this season, is how tired people are, Black people are, of this conversation. And we know numbers of books have come out, and Ben Lindsay obviously has written his book, and that's been hugely helpful. But that, I think for me, again, it's been a wake-up call, realising this is a day-to-day struggle. This isn't just a couple of moments through a year. This is on a daily basis. I can't avoid this. And I just think that tiredness that you're sort of expressing there is something that we want to explore. For you, Owen, I mean, again, this season, what's been some of the biggest challenges? Because you've said to me a number of times, this isn't like anything I've experienced before.
Yeah, in terms of the response, it isn't anything like I've experienced before. I think the challenges are getting tired. I think the challenges are around even people that you might know well, who you discover, they don't really get it. And then how do you respond to that? So you could have had some really good friendships with people, and then you discover, they don't fully understand, which simply means that some of my own experiences, I can't share them because they're not understood, they're not known about.
So are you saying, can we just, on that point, because we've been there together.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be open about it. And it's not a proud moment that I have, and there's numbers of them that I've had with you. But there's moments where I've pushed back and I've been like, either I've verbalised I don't get it, or even worse, I've said I do get it, and that's just your stuff. I remember literally using that phrase, and then you go quiet, and it's like, and then we talk a little bit later. Just help people understand then what that does. So we're in friendship together, we're working together, we've got common ground in Jesus, we're wanting to see a nation changed, and then you realise the person I'm working this closely with, he just doesn't get it where he needs to. How do you process that? Because people will be tuned in right now, and we need to help people take steps forward with this. We don't want to just dig up the ground and leave people exposed.
No, and you know, you might be tuned in right now and you might have Black friends, and you know, you know, and at times that they do go quiet. I mean, I think for me, you're saddened. I go to God. So, and I don't, that's not just that's the kind of thing a pastor would say. I genuinely go to God with these things, and I express that kind of thought. I think in this season, I'm realising there is an opportunity. So whilst before George Floyd, I would have said, I'm tired. Post George Floyd, I'm tired, but I'm also motivated. Because I've seen an opportunity to put on the table and to bring to light stuff that is very, very real and a real experience for Black people, and also a real history that I think people must understand. And so I'm motivated to do that. And I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of phone calls and conversations with different people and leaders asking me questions, and I'm motivated because I'm like, here is a moment that I have not seen before to be able to push in and try and help people understand something that they don't necessarily fully understand. But I think they need to understand, even if around them right now there are no Black people, the way our nation is changing, there soon will be.
Yeah,
there soon will be.
yeah.
The way the world is changing and our nation is changing, black people are moving into all parts of the country in a way that they never did 20, 30 years ago. And so it's not going to be long before a black person will walk into your church.
Yeah.
And then what do you say? Or a black kid will come to your school, and what do you say?
Yeah. So there's an opportunity even for those that aren't living right in the midst of this and experiencing maybe what we're experiencing maybe in London or other parts of the nation. Also, there's an opportunity to educate so that in the future some of these mistakes won't happen and we can do things differently. The other thing that I think I realised is just how important close relationship is.
Yeah.
So when you come at me and you say, and it's literally a long message, and it's, Ben, I don't think you're as far down the diversity journey as you think you are, full stop. Why don't you read this? And then there's about 10 books. Why don't you watch these films? And when I first read it, I tell you, there's not many people that could send me a message like that I would actually listen to. Right. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but it's because of how much I respect you. Yeah. You know, you've got Open, you and Pauline, you've got absolute freedom to speak into mine and Vicky's life, and we've got that relationship with you. And I did some reading. I went to the films much quicker because that's the way that I'm wired. Man, I mean, it was an education and an experience, and this relationship that we've got with you and Pauline, but also with the girls as well, is there's an openness to it, and I feel like I can find my way and be honest and be real as well. But also, I've learnt to just stop and listen, whereas before I think you would have said things that maybe just sort of went over the top. What are we saying to people that maybe don't have that opportunity? What are we saying to people that may be saying, I don't have any black friends, or maybe I'm in a black majority context and I don't want to just launch into a conversation with people at my school or college? What does that look like practically?
I think sorry, Daisy, you can go in a moment. I think that the first thing that people can do is simply to engage with the issue. And engaging with the issue is simply saying, I'm just got to understand here that I don't understand. I don't fully understand what's going on. But you don't need to live in a place of not understanding. There's a lot you can do to bring about understanding. And you don't even need to phone up I was getting phone calls from people who used to live in London, they've moved away, but they didn't know any black people now, so they're phoning me to have that conversation.
Sure.
You don't even need to do that. There are books you can read, there are films you can watch, and you're just watching them with different eyes right now. You're looking at them differently. You're looking at them as though, oh no, this is portraying a real experience. This is not just a movie. Yeah. If I think of this as a real experience, how do I feel about it when I see it? And I think there's a lot of educating that can be done simply that way. My own personal view is if people educate themselves to the point where they can understand what's going on, empathy comes quickly after that.
Sure.
But empathy only comes when you can understand something. It doesn't come just because you engage with it. That in itself isn't empathy. Yeah. So,
Daisy, what about yourself in terms of relationships, and what does it look like on the younger end of the spectrum and your own experience?
I agree with everything that you said, but I think the likelihood of you having a black person in your church is probably high. You probably just don't realise. Black people, a lot of the time, they stand out, but they're just invisible to you. So it's like, there's relationships that can be built, you just haven't. You just don't want to because, of whatever it is, your own subconscious bias or something like that. But it's like, tune into the relationships you have in your church. Look there first, because I genuinely guarantee there are black people there. You know what I mean? Even if you don't see it.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that people are waking up to in terms of that reality. So there's an intentionality, essentially. What you're saying is look, be intentional about the relationships that can be made. What about hope, Daisy? Earlier when we were chatting through, this journey of racism hasn't started for you on the 25th of May. There's a significant moment, but for you, you're like, this isn't a new subject. So when I say, is there hope? And we're gonna talk about where we hope the church can go. But for you, are there, just in this particular season, what are some of the glimmers of hope that maybe you're seeing, or maybe you're not? What would your experience be around that?
Yeah, I think, there's definitely hope, because this is different. If you look at social media, for example, there was a massive outbreak of this. To be honest, it's kind of gone. So as you said, like, society does move on quickly. Unless you're interested in that kind of thing, you're probably not seeing or hearing about it anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it is good that the church is still going, you know, with the conversations. But I think I have had, you know, personal like experiences of hope whereby I've seen something and my initial instinct is to shut down and be like, okay, that's it. You know, if someone says something like all lives matter, I'm just like, that's it. But as opposed to doing that, more just pushing in and like just giving resources, like people's hearts, I think, have been softened to this, as we've seen, and they are a lot more open. So even just like what he did, sending them stuff, I've actually seen that go such a long way, and I've seen people go on a journey, and I had that personal experience, and I was like, it does kind of feel like a one-by-one thing, which is okay, but it does kind of feel like a one-by-one thing. But I'm like, I've seen it. So I'm like, oh, that was easier than I thought. I would have usually shut down and then maybe that wouldn't have happened, kind of thing. So I think, yeah.
So even though it might be happening on a small scale,
Yeah, definitely.
there are glimmers of hope because there are men and women that are starting to just make themselves aware and be more intentional.
I think it's in the church, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, outside of the church, I don't know about the hope. But in the church, I think definitely,
you're seeing something.
Yeah.
And let's just go there then. I mean, when we talk about hope, the three of us, we love Jesus. It's our common ground. Owen, this for you, this isn't a random moment in history. And whilst the world might be seeing it as an opportunity that has just presented itself, you, I think, would use the kind of language, this is a God moment. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally believe it's a God moment. I totally believe that in God's sovereign plan, we, off the back of the COVID pandemic and where that left us, we then see this thing happen before our very eyes, and it raises all the kinds of questions. The reason I believe it's a God moment is because I believe the Bible brings about reconciliation that we haven't yet pursued. And it's not that we're not aware of it, but we haven't pursued it to the degree that we should have done as churches. And so I think God has just raised it for us. And so there is massive hope in the gospel. Yeah, there is massive hope in Scripture. There is massive hope in the God story from Genesis through to Revelation. It speaks of the nations. It speaks of people coming together, but it doesn't just picture it as something that is to happen when we all get to heaven. When you read in Ephesians and it talks about the Jew and the Gentile, it's talking about local communities that are reconciling, and that's like a here and now thing, and so. I feel there's massive hope. There's a challenge with the hope, though.
Yeah.
The challenge with the hope is sometimes for Christians and leaders, particularly, that they can get caught up with, oh, this is not strictly gospel. That that's not how we like to do things. We don't do things that way. We're not a one-issue sort of believer or whatever it is. And I think that there is a potential that some people could miss it. Precisely for the very reason that they're trying to retain something, and not realizing that the very thing that the way that they're trying to retain it is actually putting a blockage on what God wants to do, and I think that's a real danger. And but at the same time, the Bible is clear, and I've got this total belief, and I pray often. God is relentlessly committed to His own purposes, and so He will bring about His own purposes through the church, because that was always His plan.
Sure. So let's come in terms of the reconciled church. I want to go a little bit deeper into that in just a moment. I mean, what are some of the first fruits maybe that you are seeing? So let's talk specifically in the church now. So we've seen a response in terms of the world. You've touched yourself saying actually there is some hope here in the church. There is some openness. What are some of the first fruits that we're seeing in terms of this reconciled church? Because for people that either are on the journey, let's give them some encouragement to keep journeying, but also maybe for some that haven't started the journey, what does it look like to start making steps forward?
Well, I've definitely seen hope in individuals. you know, even with yourself. And I think there are a number of people who this moment has changed them. And when I hear them talk, I'm moved. And what I've realised is, when I see people who have themselves, you know, had some revelation or some understanding of what's going on, that is healing for me. That's what I've discovered. I wouldn't have known that before. But also I've realised that when people tell their stories and their experiences, and other people listen with a level of empathy, that's healing for them. So I'm seeing healing simply as people are telling stories and people are understanding stories. So I'm definitely seeing it there. I'm also seeing it because the church has almost broadly across the board, and I've had conversations across the board, not just within our own movement, they've said we mustn't let this go. And so that is such an encouragement. I've seen the church, seen leaders go, we mustn't let this go. This might fade out in the world, but it's not going to fade out here. And so that has been encouraging. And then I've had pastors reaching out, what can we do? What do we do? How do we do it? And so I've had, as you know, loads of those kinds of conversations. So there is a lot of hope I'm seeing in the people of God. And I go, yeah, and because the church is different. The church is different to the world, and we must understand that. The church is the body of Christ. There is an answer for that. Whereas in the world, it's not that the world doesn't want to have an answer, but it can't find the same answer. It's an opportunity for the church to look very, very different in the future.
And we've said, I mean, in one sense, we started by looking at the world, and we're moving into the church context and seeing some glimmers of hope. I suppose the very fact that we're talking about glimmers of hope means that this isn't just a subject that's been out in the world. When we're talking about racism, actually, we're bringing this front and centre into the church. And that's not always an easy subject. And particularly when we're talking about, I mean, even that word, racism, when we bring that to the table for self, that is huge. To come to terms with that before God and say, okay, I can see that there has been racism in me, in my heart, and that is a very challenging thing to be brought to the table. Can we just talk into some of the challenges around church? So we're seeing these glimmers of hope where people are starting to... What are some of the issues around church, the way that we see it, whether it's in youth groups or adult church? Again, personal experiences, thoughts. And obviously I know you grew up with your dad being a pastor, so you've got home base, but also you've been around and seeing, and even just other people's experiences. What would some of the issues in the church be when it comes to this massive subject?
I think one of the main issues that I have seen definitely secondhand from my dad, but also firsthand as well, is when we think about the change, a lot of what needs to happen is, I guess, top down. You think of the leaders, and you think that there is usually no black leaders. And as soon as they are starting to rise, the response that they get is just the first response. Everyone is going to look at the faults, is going to look at the negative things. And I mean, I say the first response, that's like their only response. They're just calling out the negative things that are probably sometimes not even true. And then you're just like, oh wow, you actually don't want this to happen. Like this kind of, it's almost like a power shift that some people, they don't want to let go of because it directly affects them, and they're like, I don't want to leave this position. So I think that's a real challenge. I mean, I guess my dad talks about it a lot. It's just the lack of trust that black leaders have, and they're always being brought down, they're always fighting, and they're not getting any encouragement or any support from the people that are trying to uplift them. So then it's just like a lose-lose situation. People will always have something to say, and then no one's supporting them at the same time. So it's like trying to, really grow black leaders in the church. I feel like it's a hard thing to do. It seems to be. For people, they feel like it's a hard thing to do because it's too much change. So
what does that look like? I mean, some people listening, as you're saying that, people are going to be saying, I've tried to bring through black leaders, and as Daisy's making these comments, it's like, well, I sort of agree, but, let's just be real. There's going to be people that will be able to really understand, sympathise, empathise with that journey. Again, let's bring some practical steps to the table. What do you think some of the barriers are, Owen, first of all? Why are we not seeing, or why have we not historically seen more change that perhaps now we're wanting to look more closely at, and then maybe we can move into some of the practicalities of moving forward?
I think one of the main reasons will be that we've rarely acknowledged that the reason we're not seeing black leaders is a race issue. Mm-hmm. We don't even acknowledge that it's a race issue. Therefore, we don't recognise what we need to do. The things that we might need to do to affect change on a race issue might be different to the things we might need to do to affect change on I'm a controlling leader and I won't let go of anything. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think just acknowledging it. I also think that leadership development, particularly when you're working with people from a different race and a different background, takes longer than you realise, and it's more difficult. Yeah, it is more difficult. So there might always be an easier option. We also have to acknowledge, I think, that we have unconscious bias. Yeah, I think we do have that. Yeah. And sometimes you just have to admit. You can say, no, I don't, but every leader around me is the same as me. Yeah. So, there are no leaders in your church then? So I think that I think those things are very real that people have to experience. I think it takes longer than you think. I think that I also think that leadership in different cultures can look different. So if we're used to leaders presenting in a particular way, they're active, they're on the front foot, they turn up at the prayer meeting, they're praying out, and that's what we're used to seeing, and that's how we spot a leader. In some cultures, you can lead hundreds of people and no one ever sees you. Yeah. Yeah. But you're the influence. Yeah. And so recognizing that leadership doesn't always look the same, and that when it comes to cross-cultural leadership, people from a different culture might defer. So they're not even expressing their leadership because they're like, well, not entirely sure how it's going to work here, or the way that they view leaders, they might naturally defer to them. They won't necessarily be up front with them. I think all these things are part of it, and we just need to slow down, recognise that, okay, God, I want to bring through leaders, and I want to do what it takes to do that. Yeah. And I think if you take that approach, I think you can bring through leaders. Yeah, it's not an impossible task.
No, and I just want to say that for those maybe struggling to even hear, I mean, this isn't our objective. Isn't to try and force people into a certain place. You've helped us understand that as a group of leaders together. Personally, some of the things that you guys are saying are things genuinely that God has revealed in myself. I do want people to hear that. I do want white men and women that are maybe finding this conversation a bit awkward or tricky, or that can't be me. And this is in context of being in relationship. This isn't sort of like not being in relationship. This is, I've got men and women around me that I love, that are black, that we've got good relationship, but it's only been in the last few months that God has shone a light on some of these things personally. And it is important that we take time to come before God, and we do genuinely seek forgiveness and repent. And I think that is a journey. I don't want to force people on that journey. I think it's important to make it clear that it is part of the journey. And also the journey, when we talk about the reconciled church, and I know this is something, Owen, that you wrote a short paper on, which I hear got some help in terms of edit from your family as well. So I'd love us just to talk a little bit around, what are we looking to? What are we really believing that God could do in this nation? It's not going to happen in a week. As we were talking earlier, even if it takes as long as kids that are being born now grow up in a different culture with a different narrative where racism isn't part of their day-to-day journey, wow, we would have accomplished something tremendous in God. Yeah. What does that look like?
Do you want to say anything, Dave?
Yeah, I think that when you speak about the new generation, I feel like that's really important because, as you said, racism is essentially a sin. And for a lot of people, there's just been loads of indoctrination in their mind, and they actually need to be renewed and transformed out of that. And if, as a church, we can change the culture whereby that's not there in the first place, for the people that are now coming into the church, they don't have the, oh, I only see white people on stage, so if I'm not white, I'm never going to be on stage, or oh, only these people seem to, you know, be together or get this kind of attention. If that all changes and the big culture thing is not as much of an issue, then we can start to see some real change, because ultimately, if we want to, you know, be God's people and live for God, we can't be divided by race. And there's actually so much good that comes from diversity when it's actually inclusive and not just a picture.
Amen.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Daisy. That's a proud dad moment there. I think that's just happening behind you. It's great. Thank you.
I mean, I think for me, it's first of all, you know, I'm not naive enough to think that we're going to eradicate racism in the world.
Sure.
Or we're going to eradicate racism in the church. I'm not naive enough to think that. I do think, though, that we can build a very, very different kind of church, and that racism is not the kind of experience that is currently had in church. I do believe that. I believe that most racism that people experience in church, which is often, as I say, unconscious. It's not people who are being deliberate. I think we can do a lot to get rid of that kind of racism, so people can genuinely experience that. Now, the reason I believe that is because, as you know, I honestly believe that's what the Bible teaches, and I honestly believe that the Bible doesn't teach unity and diversity in heaven alone. I think it genuinely makes way for that here and now. And I don't just think it makes way for that. I think that is exactly what the church should be seeking to do. In the same way, we wouldn't say to the church, look, the poor are kind of an optional bit. You can do the poor if you want, but if you don't have to do that, you can do all these other really good things. No, the poor is right at the heart of it. It's part of the gospel. You know, that's what Paul fought for.
And when Paul's talking about Jew and Gentile, it's not something that's just in eternity. This is right now at the cross, because of what Jesus has done. The wall of hostility
has broken down. And one of the cultural changes that brought about in those days was that people ate together. Well, there was the freedom to eat together. That wasn't there before. Jews did not associate with Gentiles, but suddenly they could. So there will be cultural change if you really push towards reconciling the church. And cultural change is something that we don't actually see much in church. It's almost like we have church, which happens in a particular way. We're very happy for people to join us, but they're joining us. They're not necessarily affecting what we do. And I believe that diversity, racial diversity, should impact how church functions, not just what church looks like. And so...
just go on, take us that layer down, just in terms of understanding that. So again, as a younger white leader, you might have said something like that to me a year, 2 years ago, and I'd have been like, that sounds really biblical and right, and that's great. Let's just hit it head on. What does that mean? So we put diversity on our websites and on our banners, and we know that it's the right thing. We know that God is a God who loves diversity. You seem to be taking us a step further. You're saying it's not just about what it looks like. I'm not being funny, but churches can look diverse at no effort. You know, you can open a door, start a church in a town, and it's not long before you're getting people from different backgrounds joining you, but then it's the same people that are growing in leadership. I think when diversity begins to impact what your church looks like, I think you will use the way you preach will change. And what it will change is how you use illustrations, personal illustrations. So I'm not great at this, but if you listen to me preach, I'm not suggesting you do it, because it's not saying it'd be like really great. But if you do, I very rarely use personal illustrations about my life. Not because I don't want to connect, but because the moment I do, I become cultural. And then if I've got people in the congregation who are not like me, suddenly they spin out. So what it's forced me to do is I simply illustrate a biblical point
with another biblical point. That's what I find I'm doing, or I'm trying to be as broad as I can so that I'm not excluding people by talking to them about my own cultural experiences. And so that would be one of the things. I think even the way we organise and administrate the church, we might say everybody's welcome, but the way our church is administered, not everybody is actually welcome, because the process of administration really excludes certain people or makes them feel unwelcome when we're saying that they're actually welcome.
Sure.
And again, where do I get that from? I get that from Acts 6 and the story of the Hebrew and the Greek widows.
Yeah.
And one lot of widows are being favoured and the other are not being favoured. It's not clear why that is, but it's a racial issue.
Yeah.
It's definitely a racial issue. But then the other thing that I suppose, being very positive, I honestly think that if the church is able to crack this issue as best it can, it's one of the most missional things we can do. It's a thing that we can do that the world doesn't have an answer for, because legislation doesn't bring people together. Legislation just stops you discriminating against people.
So good.
It doesn't make you love people.
That's right.
So we need to go further than just changing the law.
Yeah.
You know, because we can change the law, but it doesn't mean you're not going to move out of the neighbourhood.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think that, but whereas for this, I think it is there. And again, using that story of the Hebrew and the Greek widows when they come together in Acts 6 and they resolve the problem of discrimination, that bit of the passage ends with, and the church continued to grow and a large number of priests are added to the faith.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the establishment saw the church answer something that they knew they couldn't answer and realised, oh, God must be in that.
Yeah.
Because we can't answer that problem. We've never been able to do it. And they've answered it. How did they do that? God must be in that. And so I honestly think it's one of the most missional things that we can do.
It's wonderful. So helpful. I mean, this is a subject that we could talk on for hours. And hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, then Youth Culture are going to be hosting a number of conversations, particularly on the subject of racism and reconciliation in terms of the church. Just before we finish, we're going to pray in a moment, if that's okay, but is there just anything that either of you would want to just say to not just to summarise, but is there anything that you'd just want to finish by saying, anything that we haven't covered that you just want to...
I mean, I think I've said it before in different contexts. One of the things I've loved about New Day has been that we've just seen that diversity grow over the years. And over the last 10 years, and even personally for me in my own church, where we've been able to bring young people from different backgrounds to New Day, and they came along and they found Jesus there.
Yeah.
And I've just loved that. I honestly think that God has his hand on New Day, partly for this.
Yeah.
I think there is something about what we're doing that means we can push into something that not only is the world not doing, but in other contexts, church contexts, they're not pushing into. And I feel like there's a grace upon us to do it, and there's an opportunity for us to do it, and I would love us to do it. And I suppose a big encouragement is, I know for you it's a massive thing. I mean, you push it, I think, even more than I do at times. But it's a massive thing. I know God's done something in you on that, and I'm totally behind that. And I really feel that New Day has a chance to change and shape what churches look like in the future, in many different ways, but definitely around the reconciliation of the church and people coming from different backgrounds being reconciled.
That's brilliant. Do you want to add anything, Daisy?
I agree with what he said, yeah.
Well, I just, before we pray, I want to say thank you so much to both of you. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for being real and vulnerable, but thank you for your patience. As I said earlier, I think one of the things that moves me most is realising I'm only just waking up to this issue. And so bless you for your perseverance in the faith. Bless you for your perseverance with relationship with people like me. I really genuinely appreciate it. I think it's amazing. I think you guys are just heroes of the faith for so many reasons. And God has done a thing in me, but one of the reasons that I think I've got to where I've got to is because of people like you guys that have just shown grace. So thank you. And I just would emphasise what you've just said together. With New Day, with the church here in the UK, we are committed to seeing a change come about in this nation that will see a generation with a different story. And that's what I'd love us to pray for right now, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's pray.
Father, I want to thank you for moments such as these, Lord. And when I say moments such as these, I don't just mean this moment, but the moment that we're currently in, oh God, which I'm convinced is you. I'm convinced that you are about a work here. And it might not look pretty in the way that we want it to. It might even appear a bit weird. Why would God use that moment? But Father, you do that. And I want to pray that as this, right up front, this question talks about how do we move from a movement to lasting change. I want to thank you that you've already done that. You've already moved. It's the gospel that changes everything. It's the gospel that brings about permanent change. And I want to thank you for the way in which, among other things, the gospel is being trumpeted and promoted and brought out through this process, Lord God, through this period of time. And Lord, I do pray that you would do a mighty thing in the church in the UK. I thank you for leaders whose eyes have been opened. I thank you for people who are committed. And I pray, Father, that you would do such a great work. Lord, I pray that we won't get distracted by things that are really peripheral, that are on the edge. I pray that we would keep our eyes focused on you and on what you're doing. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Well, guys, it's been an absolute privilege being joined by you, Owen and Daisy. And we're going to continue on this subject throughout the course of the week. There'll be other moments as well where we'll be both preaching and speaking again into the subject of the reconciled church and the subject of racism. But don't forget, through the course of this week at 1 o'clock, we'll be continuing to come to you live on the subjects of sex and the secular gospel and also life online. Really, really looking forward to it. We've got some great guests coming your way. Don't forget to tune in this evening at 8 o'clock for New Day TV. It's going to be an awesome evening with Rebecca Walker preaching to us on the subject of hope. We hope to see you there. God bless you. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you again soon.
In the darkness we were waiting without
my son. My son is simple. My heart, it longs for you. Nothing in this world still matters me hard like you do. Abide with me as I want to bow the knee before Jesus. It's a way of saying, God, I'm for you. As for me in my life, I'm about you. What do I want? I want you. What can satisfy me more than anything else?